My name's Matthew Borson, and I'm the managing partner here at Straight Path Wealth Management. And as we enter 2025, I want to talk about some of the things we can expect over the next 12 months. Some of the economic changes, policy changes, and things that may impact your personal future, and the adjustments and strategy changes that you may and should make. The thing that first sticks out when we talk about 2025 is that there's a change in control in Washington, D.C. Republicans now have control over the Senate, the House, as well as the presidency. And this means a few kind of key things that we're paying attention to going into 2025. The first is tariffs. Donald Trump talked a lot about tariffs on the campaign trail. He's walked some of those comments back already, but we're going to pay very close attention to what is actually enacted and how that adjusts the negotiations internationally, especially around trade agreements. If there are large tariffs, there could be changes in pricing. They could change where it's effective and where it's attractive to invest, whether it's international versus US. And so tariffs have a lot of impacts on a lot of different stock market, economy, and even inflation measures. And so we're going to watch those closely. Secondly, tax policy is likely to change or at least be debated throughout 2025. Our current tax rules are based on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which were enacted during Trump's first term. But one of the provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was that these rules expire at the end of 2025, and everything reverts back to what it was in 2015 and 2016 if Congress doesn't make any changes or pass new laws. So we expect new laws to be passed, but we're going to pay very close attention to what those are going to be. We expect them to be somewhat similar to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, but we don't know the details and some of the adjustments that they may make. So that'll be a heavy area of focus for us looking forward into 2025. Looking forward to do planning in 2026 and beyond. Lastly, another thing that we think may change is some of the regulations, specifically around the industries of AI and energy. This was something that Biden paid very close attention to. They had some restrictions on each of those industries, and Trump has indicated that he'll probably remove some of those. And so that may change some of the investment themes that work going forward in 2025 and forward. And so we want to pay very close attention to that too. Next, let's talk about the market outlook for 2025. And there's a couple key themes in the market that we want to talk about, one of which is Federal Reserve policy. So the Federal Reserve has really dominated headlines over the last several years, really since COVID, as they've played with the interest rates, trying to get the economy to continue through the COVID crisis, but then also not to overheat as we had high inflation back in 21 and 22. The Federal Reserve, though, over the last year or so has been steadily decreasing interest rates, and they did so just a couple weeks ago. The expectation in 2025 is that they'll continue to decrease, although not maybe quite as much as they thought they were going to. And even the market expects the Federal Reserve to decrease even less than they're projecting. So maybe we'll get 1, 2, maybe 3 Federal Reserve rate decreases going forward in 2025, but that's a lot different than what the expectation was even 4, 5, 6 months ago. One of the reasons that they're not going to decrease interest rates as much as we expected is because inflation has remained a little bit higher than expected. Core inflation continues to run at about 3.3% per year, and headline inflation is still at 2.7%. Both of those numbers are a little bit higher than what the Federal Reserve would like to see, and they're rightfully nervous that if they decrease interest rates too much, we might see a replay of 21 and 22 when interest rates were dropping, but inflation was increasing too quickly and they had to take their foot off the gas. So we want to make sure that we pay really close attention to the federal interest rates, but then also what is going on with inflation, how those two interact. That'll be a key thing and a key theme, especially if you have money in bonds for your market investments going forward in 2025. If we talk about the stock market, and many times we look at valuations, and what is the valuation, how much are we paying for a certain amount of earnings that are created in the stock market right now? And the answer is right now, it does seem a little bit high. A lot of the historical measures of how much we're paying for the amount of profits companies are creating, a lot of those historical measures do look kind of high right now. Part of that is because the growth, especially in the tech sector, has been really, really high. There's been a handful of 7 to 10 companies that have done exceptionally well over the last couple of years, and those have really led the S&P 500 and the broader market upward. But we want to be careful and make sure that we don't get caught in an overly inflated market, and so we want to make sure that we're very particular about where we're investing, how we're investing, and making sure that we're making smart decisions. One of the interesting opposite and tension points, though, in the market is international market valuations. So I said a second ago that U.S. valuations look kind of high. Ironically, international valuations look a little low, and they look a little cheap compared to a lot of historical norms. That may be a good place to invest some, certainly not all, but maybe some of your money. But we also want to be careful because some of those depressed prices came because of Trump talking about tariffs on the campaign trail. And so this goes back to the policies that I talked about a second ago and how they interact with our stock market valuations. International markets look a lot cheaper than US markets, but we also want to be careful that we don't get overly attached to those due to some of the policy concerns that we have going forward. Now let's talk a little bit about tax policy changes in 2025. A second ago, I talked about some of the things that we're looking at for 2026 and beyond, but there are some changes that are also happening over the next 12 months that we need to take into account. First is that every year there's inflation adjustments in the tax brackets and in the standard deduction. So there's a little bit more room, there's a little bit bigger brackets, where if you make a little bit more income, we can slide a little bit more of that into lower brackets, potentially lowering your taxes just a little bit. And so making sure that we take that into account when we're doing tax planning is a really, really important part of 2025. There's also a couple changes that harken back to Secure Act 2.0 that are being enacted now into 2025. The first is an enhanced catch-up contribution. So if you're over age 50, you may be familiar and you may know that you can contribute more to your 401k than those that are under the age of 50. There's a catch-up contribution that elevates your annual contribution limit up a little bit higher. Well, the Secure Act 2.0 added an even more enhanced catch-up contribution for those in between the ages of 60 and 63. So if you fall between 60 and 63, you may be able to contribute even more inside your employer plan this year. Make sure you talk to us or your HR department about how to make sure you take full advantage of that. The other change that is now finally enacted in 2025, we've been waiting for IRS final regulations on this, and we finally have it, is required minimum distributions on beneficiary IRA or inherited IRA accounts. If you received an IRA account, if you inherited an IRA account after 2020, you're subject to a new 10-year rule. You've had to take money out of an IRA or a Roth IRA within a 10-year time span. But one of the things that was unclear is if you also had to take out a little bit each year, in addition to just making sure it was empty on that 10th year. We now finally have that answer. The IRS has given us an indication, and it goes into effect essentially for 2025. And the answer is yes. You do still have a required minimum distribution. You still have to take a little bit out each year and also have it emptied by the end of the 10th year. And so we're operating under two sets of rules now that we got to make sure both are fulfilled. That's a pretty big tax change that's enacting for 2025. It's going to change some strategies for inherited IRAs. So make sure you're paying attention to that and talk to us or your other professionals on making sure that you get that handled correctly. And while we're talking about retirement, I want to talk about a kind of a concerning statistic that we saw come out of some recent BlackRock surveys and insights. BlackRock's recent survey showed that 60% of Americans were unsure if they were going to be able to retire. And some of that is true. A lot of the data around average retirement savings shows that the average American doesn't have a lot for retirement. But we've also found in working with clients that a lot of people who have saved plenty also fall into that 60% where they're very unsure if they can retire. And the only reason they're unsure is because they've never had a good retirement plan ran for them. And that's where we come in. We work with you to look at your retirement savings, the track that you're on, and figure out, are you on the right path? Are you going to be able to retire when you want to retire? And if you're not, then we figure out how do we tweak things and how do we make adjustments to make sure that you can. Many times the answer is, hey, just keep doing what you're doing and you're actually on track. And we can see the confidence rise in the clients when we're able to tell them that. So if you haven't had a retirement plan update ran over the last couple years, please reach out to us. We'd love to sit down with you, look at all of the data, make sure that you're on track and give you the confidence so that you can retire. So those are just some of the things that we're looking forward to in 2025. There's a lot of changes on the horizon. There's a lot of planning opportunities. Please reach out to us as we'd love to walk through that and make sure that you're fully taking advantage of all of them so that you're set up for success in 2025.